Welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. On today's episode, I want to talk about the true cost of grading cards. And no, I'm not just talking about how much money it costs to have your cards graded at a certain tier. We're actually going to go a lot deeper than just that. And then also in this video, I'm going to talk about how my stance on grading has recently changed, because it's very important. As the hobby progresses, you need to also progress as well and adapt and change and make sure whatever you're doing fits the current market, no matter what that is. When you talk about the true cost of grading, whether people want to hear the truth or not, the fact of the matter is that certain card grading companies, their cards just sell higher than other card grading companies at the same grade. And a lot of that is, or most of it, really is subjective. And it's just, people's preferences. And yes, a lot of people will make the argument for a lot of different grading companies that grades are very inconsistent at certain grades, and that is very true. But you could also make that argument within the same grading card company. You can make the argument for a lot of different PSA 8s or PSA 9s and have two PSA 8s in your hand and compare the two. And even within those grades, it can be very subjective. So to have that argument as a whole, I think at a point it's almost unfair to other grading card companies, but you can't argue with the facts, because the facts of the matter is that certain cards sell for more. Whether you want them to sell for more or not, at the end of the day, really is not going to be your choice. It's going to be the market that dictates, whose slabs people value more. There's definitely two schools of thought when it comes to graded cards. You definitely have like the collector mindset versus the investor flipper mindset. And can those two mindsets merge a little bit? Yes. But really, they are separate. And a lot of the things you'll hear collectors really say, buy the card, not the grade. But very often, and believe it or not, more times than not, those people that are really preaching that buy the card, not the grade, when you start to look at their personal collections, and especially when their collections are a little bit more on the high-end scale, you will start to really see that they own a lot of PSA 10s, and a lot of those PSA 10s, they did not grade themselves. They bought those cards on the secondary market. So very often, and definitely more times than not, you will come to find that people's actions speak much louder than their words. So just be careful when you hear people talk like that. But then also, a big argument that has been raging for almost forever is what cards are quote unquote acceptable to be graded versus cards that are not acceptable to be graded. And the argument always was you should only, grade cards that are, like I said, quote unquote worthy to be graded. And then what happened was you have a year like this that really turned the entire grading market on its head. And why did it turn the grading market on its head? Because there was a lot of cards that people were sitting on that they considered bulk. And like I said, those ungradable cards, and those cards were like, Jungle and Fossil, first edition commons and uncommons, a lot of the base set unlimited stuff, even a lot of the base set shadowless commons and uncommons. These cards weren't being graded. And what happened was you started to see the market put very high dollar amounts on these cards. So what happened? You had a ton of collectors and investors that had a ton of these cards that they were sitting on for bulk, that they were not able to capitalize on that market. Whether or not that market is going to last and whether that market actually makes sense isn't the conversation. The conversation is that so many people missed out on that opportunity because they let that collector, who was speaking to them, telling them what was worthy to be, actually graded and slabbed. And I'll tell you what, those people that were saying that, 2020 and 2021 proved them wrong. Now, is it going to prove them wrong in the long term? That's, up in the air. That's to be determined. You can make the argument either way. But for those people that didn't listen to people say that, who didn't care that, maybe these cards were, like I said, unworthy to be graded, if they were sending away a lot of those cards when the market really picked up, those people probably made out better than anyone else. And the reason why I said they made out better than anyone else is because the returns on those cards were so much higher than, say, like, maybe a high-end Charizard Holo from a different set, That card on the secondary market, even at a raw price, is probably relatively expensive. To have it graded, maybe on the high end, you would see a 3 to 4x return on that card, and that's great. But these commons and uncommons that, were selling for 25 cents, 50 cents, a dollar, when they were grading at PSA 9s and PSA 10s, and they were selling between $80 and $100, what is the return on that card versus a Charizard Raw that you picked up for $20 and sold for $80? There's a huge difference right there. And what happened was a lot of people were wrong, and they got very defensive, and they were not willing to admit that they were wrong. And even as the market starts to retrace, they're still not even admitting now that they were wrong, because a lot of these cards, even with the retraces, we're still seeing these cards hold pretty strong premiums. And I've seen a lot of the very recent PWCC auctions, like, a card that very easily comes to mind is like a Pikachu Jungle First Edition card in PSA 9 or 10. That card is consistently selling at very high dollar amounts. There's probably a lot of Pikachu Jungle First Edition cards in near mint condition that were sitting in people's collections, and they were not able to capitalize on those cards because when they did send them away for bulk, when they realized what the market was doing, it was a little too late. And why do I say it was a little too late? Well, it was a little too late just because of turnaround times. And that's the magic word right there, turnaround times. And why is turnaround times a magic word? Because turnaround times, whether you want to admit it or not, turnaround times are really acting almost as a gatekeeper for this hobby right now, just because it's really holding back a flood of cards that will potentially hit the market. It's what's keeping prices relatively high. And why is it keeping prices relatively high? Well, because there is that strong demand for graded cards, but there's just not a ton of graded cards on the market. And more importantly, not only is there not a ton of graded cards on the market, the cards that are being graded right now are not by like a lot of the more fan favorite companies, meaning PSA really. You've seen new guys come onto the scene like CGC. And CGC, are they a new guy? Yes. In the Pokemon trading card game, they are a new guy. They only, started up in July of 2020. That is like a year and a month at the recording of this video that they've been around. And what happened was you saw a ton of people instantly flood to CGC. And I think the main reason they flooded there was, yes, because of those turnaround times. And whether people want to admit it or not, and don't get me wrong, I have a ton of cards I've sent away to CGC. I've got a lot of cards returned back. CGC is a much different grader than PSA at very high ends. Do I think that the CGC 7s and CGC 8s are comparable to PSA? Yeah, maybe. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because PSA 8s, PSA 9s, and definitely PSA 10s are all selling for a premium. And one of the cards I recently sent away and I got a return back, it was only 5, but they were all the Reds Pikachu 20th anniversary cards. And those cards are very easy to grade. They grade high almost every time. I got back 4 CGC 9.5s and 1 CGC 9. And yes, will I put those cards onto the market? Yes, I've already sent them away. I'm going to actually have them in, it will be September's PWCC auction block. But why did I do that? The reason why I did that is because I know that those cards at those grades aren't going to hold like a long premium for a long time. I feel like those cards, the prices will drop pretty quick. But if those cards were just sent to PSA, they would all have probably graded. Maybe the 9 would have stayed a 9, but I doubt it. I think all 5 of them honestly would have been PSA 10s. Now, the thing is, though, is the PSA 10s for 5 of those Reds Pikachu versus 5 CGC 9.5s and 1.9. The price difference you're talking about is absolutely, gigantic. You're talking hundreds of dollars in price difference. And then the conversation or the argument would be, well, why didn't you just send it to PSA? And I think you know the answer to that. I didn't send them the PSA because I couldn't. You don't even really have an option to send anything to PSA right now of any card at, any sort of lower tiered service. When your cheapest grading option for PSA is $200, that extremely limits the amount of, or not the amount, but the types of cards you can send the PSA. So a lot of these cards that, might still be worth it to be graded, that cards that raw you could pick up, let's say, between $20 and $30. If you land some 9s and 10s, you're looking between $100 and $120 per card. There's a lot of money to be made there. You're talking, for some of these cards, you can make like $90 to $100 a piece just for having them graded. But you can't do that at that $200 grade-in tier. So it pushed a lot of those cards to CGC. But what's going to happen, given enough time, is people will eventually start to get enough of those lower grades, and they're going to start to realize that CGC cards just don't have that same premium for PSA. And that's going to be the conversation people will want to have too, is, well, what cards are worth it to be sent? Because even at CGC, and one of the biggest mistakes I made was I should have been sending everything I had to CGC when they still had like their $7 grading fees, because I had already knew that all the prices were going to increase. How did I know? I literally made a video on this channel in January, and the title of that video was The Best Investment of January 2021. It wasn't a single card. It wasn't a single set. The best investment I had was just to grade your cards, because I said in that video, this will probably be one of the last opportunities you ever get in this hobby to grade your cards at these low prices. And, I took my advice a little bit. I sent hundreds of cards away, but I wish I just pulled the Band-Aid off and literally sent everything I had at lower tiers. Even when everything really started to pick up, PSA's prices were still like $10. CGC was $7. Even when PSA raised their prices to $20, and I think a lot of people really started saying, maybe PSA bulk tier is going to disappear, and that's why they got more cards submitted to them with price increases than they ever had before. It's because people started to see the writing on the wall, especially when it comes to these lower dollar amount cards. Will there always be, like a reason to only grade the very, very high end of whatever Pokemon set it is, like that super high end card that demands the highest dollar? There will always be a reason to do that. But when it comes to those lower tier cards, especially a lot of like the real nice promos, a lot of these promos people really chase after, is it going to be worth it to grade these cards? Who knows what PSA's grading prices are going to come back at? CGC, $15 a card for bulk plus $10 for subgrades. Really? You're looking at $25 on the low end for CGC for some of these higher end cards. Because with a higher end CGC card, you're going to want subgrades. For lower end cards, you can definitely choose to not go with subgrades, and I actually recommend it for real low dollar amount cards. But the problem is when you start talking $15 grading fees, you really eliminate an entire subsection of the hobby of cards that were worth it to be graded. And that's another thing that I hear people give some advice that I definitely don't agree with. You'll hear some people say, well, I don't recommend grading any card that after grading is going to be worth less than $100 per card. I think that's terrible advice. In fact, I think that's absolutely awful advice. You know why? Because there's a lot of money to be made in grading lower end cards. And whether you believe me or not, I don't need to argue this because you can go on eBay and you can see a ton of sales, like I said, for a lot of that very common, bulk from Jungle, from Fossil, from Bayset. Those commons, uncommons, you can go pick up a auction lot on eBay. You could spend, I don't know, 20, 30, $40, get a crazy amount of cards, send those cards away for grading and get $30, $40 a piece for some of these, even at 8s and 9s. Like, guys, that is a huge return on those cards. So for people to say it's not worth it to send some of those cards, I feel like they are gatekeeping, like grading a little bit. And maybe their argument is that they're trying to protect people. But like I said, all those people that were being protected when it came to 2020 and 2021 really ended up getting burned in the long run. And the big question, maybe even the $1,000,000 question for a lot of people, is really just going to be, what does the backlog for like PSA really look like? What does the backlog for CGC really look like? What does the backlog for BGS really look like? And I don't have a good answer for that. There's can be a lot of speculation. We did see CGC's turnaround times decrease. I could tell you what, I have no clue why that turnaround time decreased. We can make a video just talking about how their turnaround times mean nothing right now. I'm still waiting on a return that was received by CGC 7 days after a return I already received. The time of recording this video is August 16th. My submission that I received back was submitted on February 10th. It was mailed out on July 15th. Okay? The other submission they received, both the same tier bulk, was received on February 17th. So the submissions were received 7 days apart. I still have not received that submission back. So even though it was received 7 days after the submission that was shipped out on July 15th, here we are, August 16th, 31 calendar days, not business days, apart, and I still have not received that back. So that means for them to get through 7 days worth of returns, they're already at over 31 calendar days. And, maybe that day, timeline is still going to keep continuing. But for them to lower that turnaround time makes no sense to me. And I have no clue why they did that. But I also have no clue why any grading card company continues to lie about their turnaround times. But even with PSA, you just got to wonder how many cards are truly in their backlog. And when you think about backlog, there's somebody out there, some random person out there in the world their cards were the last bulk submission received by PSA before they closed the doors. And who knows who that person is. But whoever that person who, statistically speaking, was the last bulk submission inputted into PSA's system, the question is, how long is it going to take that person to get that bulk submission back? And really, you could make an entire video series debating this argument, because at this point, really that turnaround time for that person could just be a thing of make-believe. We could be talking a year, 2 years. I mean, you can make crazy statements on how long that turnaround time can be. And when you think about the fact that PSA was receiving so many cards that they had to, more or less close all their tiers. Yeah, they kept the super high-end tier open and jacked up the price for it. And yes, are they slowly opening up tiers? They are. But when will bulk be opened back up? Bulk could potentially not be opened back up this year. So 2021 for PSA bulk can realistically be not open. And then for some people might make the argument that in 2022, PSA will not open up their bulk tiers. Because you got to remember, there's a lot of people are, piling up cards, waiting for these different PSA tiers to open up. And it's not just in Pokemon. Mainly it's sports. There's a lot of sports cards that when they start to open up $100 tiers, $75 tier, $50 tiers, PSA will get huge floods of cards at those different tiers. So for them to finally get down to the bulk, it's very interesting when that will happen. And then when they do finally get down to that bulk tier, and whether that bulk tier is $20, or let's just, for the sake of this video, let's just say they do open it back up at $10, which I find that chances to be almost zero, if not less than zero. And I don't even know how you can get less than zero, make the chances out of a negative. But let's just say, for the sake of, like I said, this video, PSA did open up their bulk tier at $10. The amount of cards that PSA would get flooded with in the first week of that tier being open would be absolutely insane. And they really would have no other option, except for to just close up their tiers again. And it begs the question of, well, if these card grading companies are taking so long to grade cards, their prices are increasing so high where it's not worth it to, grade a lot of these lower end tier cards, what's going to happen to the rest of the market? And really, when you talk about the rest of the market, you talk about like sealed product prices, the raw individual card market. These cards, a lot of that price is built in with graded prices in mind. And, is that a good way to look at, sealed product or raw cards? No. You shouldn't be buying raw cards, and you shouldn't be buying sealed product with the sole intention of grading in mind. But a lot of people are doing that. And given enough time, when you start to pull that out of the hobby, it can have long-lasting effects that I don't think anybody really knows the true effects that, these slowdowns and, PSA and CGC and Beckett being closed. No one knows what's really going to be the long-running effects on the hobby. And it could just have a long-running effect where a lot of these, mid-tier modern cards never get graded. And you can make the argument that they could be graded because, like I said, as long as there's somebody out there willing to buy that graded card, even if it's a card you might not think it's worth it to be graded, does not mean that there's not people out there who do believe that that card is worth it to be graded and would be willing to pay, a premium for that graded card. But when you have to start, adding in a $25 grading fee for a, $30 card, maybe it's not worth it at that point. There's a lot of grading card companies opening up every day. Almost every time you turn the corner, you hear about a new mom and pop grading card company with some acronym that's opening up. Are a lot of these companies going to survive? No, probably not. Will you have a couple make it out in the end? Yeah. Will prices change for a lot of these cards? Will the market start to adapt and change and value cards differently? I want to say yes, but I don't believe that. I just think that there will always be a premium for a PSA 10. And whether or not a PSA 10 is equivalent in every aspect to a CGC 9.5, doesn't matter. People will continue to apply a higher demand and a higher premium to that card. And that's why this topic of this video is the true cost of grading. Because if you do want to send your cards away and you do want to have them graded at some kind of relatively quick turnaround time, the true cost of grading for you will be on a lot of these cards a net negative, because you're not going to get the high-end top dollar for those cards, because the top dollar for those cards is like a PSA slab, and those services are just not available for you. So yeah, that's why this topic of this video is the true cost of grading. Now, I did talk also, something that I've done that I've changed in the hobby. One of the things that I've recently changed doing, and I didn't even really realize I was doing it until, I started like pulling back a little bit and realizing what I was doing. But I've stopped opening up a lot of modern product. I've stopped sending away a lot of lower end cards to CGC, and in fact, I have not sent a single submission to CGC since they raised their bulk grading costs to $15 a card. So I'm still waiting on a few hundred cards to, be sent back from CGC, but I don't know what's going to happen after those cards get sent back. I don't expect any of the card grading tiers to lower in price. So what I've also been doing is starting to pick up a few graded card companies of different acronyms of cards that I think people shouldn't have graded with those companies. And when I pick up those cards, I haven't cracked any of the slabs yet. I'm still keeping them slabbed up, and I'm just going to wait for a lot of these cards that I've now added to my personal collection. But when it comes around and PSA does open up those bulk tiers, and who knows, this could be a year, this could be 2, this could be 3 years down the line, then I will go and I will crack those slabs, and maybe we'll have a video on this channel where it's just a slab cracking extravaganza. Because I'll tell you right now, if you made it to the end of this video right now, I'll give you a secret. I've been picking up some high-end graded cards for nothing, just because people do not put value in different grading card companies. And when I talked about at the beginning where those collectors say you should buy the card and not the grade, if you understand grading skills, there's some really good values out there. With that said, be very careful, because it's pretty dangerous doing this, because there's a lot of those 3-symbol acronyms that are grading cards that I found out way higher than they should. And I bought a couple of these mom and pop graded card companies that do provide subgrades, and their subgrades are way off. But like I said, just be careful. But there's a lot of good deals out there too. CGC 9s. There's some strong CGC 9s. If you do want like a strong PSA 10 in the future, there's a lot of CGC 9.5 selling for, very cheap prices. And when I talk about cheap prices, really I'm talking about more higher end cards that don't just show up on the market every day at high tier. And that's the big thing too, is starting to recognize cards that don't come up on the market in a very raw mint condition very often. So if you get a card that you almost never see raw, in a very good mint copy, but you can pick that card up for CGC 9 and 9.5 and pay, a lot of times I'm seeing like a quarter of the price of PSA, half the price of a PSA card. You can start making your moves there. Start acquiring those cards. Just be careful. Make sure whatever you are acquiring, you do see a future. You do see like growth potential for a lot of those cards. But anyways, this video, I wanted this to be like a 10-minute video, and look where we are now. But hey, listen, if somehow you made it to the end of this video and you've listened to me rant like a maniac, do me a favor, go down below, hit the subscribe button. Other than that, hit the like button, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.